So you have chosen the Blue Lions led by Dimitri, correct?
And don't forget, the Blue Lions walk the true path of justice.
In Fire Emblem, characters have their own individual base stats and growth rates. Base stats are the initial starting points of each character in each of the various areas: HP, Strength, Magic, Dexterity, previously known as Skill, Speed, Luck, Defense, Resistance, and in Three Houses, Charm. So these are their baselines, what they start out with and how they perform right off the bat. But what about their long-term improvement potential? That would be their growth rates. These percentages determine the chances they'll have to receive a point up in each stat upon leveling up. Beyond this though, there are also class growth rates. These are further modifiers that might increase or decrease a character's growth rates in certain areas while in certain classes, allowing for a lot of variation, tweaking, and further modification of characters' individual growths. In this guide, I'm going to be analyzing the Blue Lion students' bases and growths and determining what I think would be good class fits for them based upon a variety of different factors. If you've yet to play through Fire Emblem Three Houses at least once, I'd recommend that you do so first and come back to this video later. I'm not going to be spoiling anything in this video outside of class names and such, but I honestly think it'll be more fun if you play through blind the first time and have fun classing your characters however you want. For those of you wondering what the more optimal class fits are, maybe wanting some insight into class progressions, or just looking for more ideas, then this video is for you. I do want to mention that the current meme of the community is that some of the best classes are Wyvern Lord and Bow Knight in this game, and that a lot of characters should end up in these classes because they're honestly a bit broken. They've got ridiculous base stats, avoid, mobility, the Canto ability, and so on. But in my personal opinion, I just don't think that that's very fun to make just about everyone the same thing, even if it would objectively be considered the optimal way to go for many physical units. With things like Stride coupled with Dancers, Warping, and having everyone be Flyers or Bow Knights, yeah, it's not hard to see why it would trivialize things. There are also ridiculous builds capable of reaching 100 crit that can happen with a lot of characters, but I'd rather discuss good class paths in general for individual students in this video, and not solely focus on trying to break the game. We can do that in another one. At the end of the day, the goal of this game is to have fun, so do whatever you want. This guide is just to help get you some ideas for characters or point you in a good direction for them. Unlike most Fire Emblem games, classes in Fire Emblem Three Houses also don't have their own stat caps to limit characters within reasonable limits. Instead, it's the characters themselves that have their own individual stat caps, so when considering classes, especially final classes, this won't be something that you really have to worry about. Let's start off with the main man himself, Dimitri. Dimitri is a god. I've heard nothing but amazing things about him from everyone that I've spoken to who's played the Blue Lion's path, and in turn, his bases and growths speak well to this too. For his bases, right at the start, Dimitri's got the highest charm base, tied for the highest strength, some of the highest HP, and all of his other base stats are either up there or not too bad compared with everyone else in the Lions. He doesn't really have any areas he's overtly weak in when it comes to his bases, as to be expected from a Lord character. Boasting a 60% strength growth, 50 dexterity, speed, and 40 defense, Dimitri is a natural-born killer, and will be destroying many enemies who cross his path in the battlefield. That's right, every last one of them. He is a bit weaker in the resistance department, though not quite as vulnerable as some of the other Lions, but if he were to have anything remotely close to an Achilles heel, it's probably that. As one of the 3 Lord characters in Three Houses, Dimitri gets his own special promotion classes throughout the game, in the Lord, High Lord, and Great Lord classes, with Great Lord being his final special promotion, an infantry sword and lance wielding class. It's difficult to argue for making Dimitri anything other than his canon Great Lord promotion, because it's just so awesome, but as far as I'm concerned, you can make Dimitri just about any physical class and have him turn out great. So perhaps if this is a second playthrough for you, or if you want to just try something different with him, then we'll discuss his other options here. There will always be cool little detours you can take for characters that'll net them some interesting abilities that they wouldn't usually get from their main class lines. For example, having a character with a main focus on lances and swords like Dimitri go into the fighter and brigand classes with axe proficiency, for him to eventually learn Death Blow for an extra 6 strength upon initiating combat. A move like this is valuable, though may not be as necessary for someone with great strength already, like Dimitri. But since there's just so many combinations and options available, I'm just going to be focusing on the main overall class route that I think is best for each of the students in this video. In addition to growth rates being adjusted for each class you make your characters into, classes also have a unique set of stat boosts and penalties to balance them out. For example, many opt to take Dimitri down the Cavalier class line, but in the Cavalier and Paladin classes, he'll lose 10% of his speed growth, and also lose 2 points of his base speed while he's in them. He is, however, one of the speedier units in the Blue Lions, so if you're thinking of making someone a Cavalier, he's certainly not the worst pick. I do also want to mention that alongside the -2 base speed penalty, characters will also gain 1 point of HP, strength, defense, and 3 movement in the Cavalier class, so it's not all bad. But these class adjustments are very minor and won't matter as much later on, so I don't want to dive into this for every class too much. Just keep in mind that your character's stats will adjust slightly in each class. Ingrid and Felix would feel the sting of the Cavalier and Paladin speed penalty and worse growth a little less, since they've got even higher speed growth than Dimitri does to begin with. So if you're looking for a Paladin, you can opt to make one of them one. Dimitri does also have a budding talent in riding as an added bonus, but I'll cover that in a budding talents guide later on. It doesn't really make or break this decision for him, in my opinion. Going with his unique set of classes from Lord to High Lord to Great Lord, Dimitri's growth rates don't really change all that much, just being slightly improved throughout, though he does get a nice boost to his HP growth to make him even tankier, and some extra dexterity for increased accuracy and crit rate. The charm stat increases battalion and gambit damage, which Dimitri will definitely make use of, and it also helps with the dance competition if you ever wanted to try making him a dancer. The charm ability learned from the Lord class will also allow adjacent allies to deal 3 extra damage during combat, helping out nearby allies and solidifying Dimitri's role as the team leader too. High Lord and Great Lord will also grant Dimitri Lance Fair for an extra +5 attack when using lances. In addition to this, the High Lord class has 5 movement and the Great Lord class will give him 6 movement, which is actually really good for a non-mounted infantry class, considering the highest mobility classes in the game like Paladin and Wyvern Lord have 8 movement. It's basically on par with some of the infantry master classes. Overall though, like I said, Dimitri could pull off any physically based class well. He's got the amazing growths and bases to allow for this flexibility. In terms of magical classes, Dimitri's magic growth is pretty poor at 20%, and coupled with the fact that he's got a lack of proficiency in reason magic, and none of the magical classes provide more than a 10% increase to his 20% growth, I'd say Dimitri's not really cut out for magical roles. At least, if you opt to take him down that route, he might be missing a bit of power with his attacks and capabilities. Characters in Three Houses, like in Fire Emblem Echoes, also have unique spell lists, meaning that different characters in the same class will learn different magic. Dimitri gets Thunder and Thoron, just like his buddy Felix, which while isn't terrible, also isn't great as it's just a measly 2 spells. To put it into perspective for you, even Dedue gets a 3rd spell that he can learn, and he's one of the last units that you should make into a mage. Ultimately, I won't be recommending it for Dimitri. Dimitri does learn Aura if you opt to take him down the Faith magic route, and he's one of 3 units in the game to learn it, with the others being Byleth and Marianne, but I don't think it's worthwhile enough to warrant doing. Aura is the 2nd most powerful offensive Faith magic spell in the game, with a base might of 12 and a really good base crit of 20. If you did everything you could to increase Dimitri's dexterity and luck for even more hit rate and crit with it, perhaps you could make a pretty interesting offensive white mage, but like I said, his base damage will probably be pretty lacking with his low magic stat. Swordmaster makes Dimitri even stronger and faster, and could be a solid fit for him too, but it'll be 1 less movement than Great Lord, and is more of a side grade, honestly. If you want him to focus on swords though, this could be a good way to go. Sniper rounds him out even better and gives him a great ranged attack option with bows, though you could have him use bows as a secondary weapon in any class with the freedom that this game provides. And ultimately, once again, the movement holds this one back a bit at 5 movement. Dimitri does better as a bow knight, especially considering most opting for having him train riding. Continuing off of that, Bow Knight with Dimitri is of course a solid option. It doesn't do much for him growth-wise, but the extra range and mobility with Dimitri's good strength, speed, and dexterity is definitely enticing. It's a really great late-game class, and arguably one of the best because of the movement, canto, and everything else on top of Dimitri's incredible strength. Because the growth rate bumps on it aren't that amazing though, it could be a good class to switch into near the very end of the game, provided you have the skill levels to do so. And like we talked about earlier, he can of course also pull off Wyvern Lord, which gives him an incredible 75% strength growth and even more HP, speed, and defense. Though Dimitri has a distinct lack of proficiency in axes, so it'll take a lot more work for him to get there. It's a meme for a reason. This class is just really good. Overall, I'd say when Dimitri isn't in his Great Lord class, I'd still be focusing on lances and swords, perhaps with the added benefit of using bows for the ability to attack at range. Dedue is what we would call your typical armor knight kind of a unit. Very slow, extremely allergic to being hit with magical attacks, but boasts really great potential as a physical wall with great HP, strength, and defense. Probably because of his massive stature, Dedue won't do all that well in riding horses or Pegasi, At the very least, he won't progress as quickly while being instructed in these areas, nor does he believe much in the religion of Seros and faith magic. His magic growth is even worse than Dimitri's at a measly 15%, and coupled with his poor speed, I'd also say that he's not cut out for any magical roles. His speed in general is going to be an issue as the game progresses, as odds are he's probably not going to be getting too many points of it with that measly 20% growth rate. Things like gauntlets can mitigate this by granting guaranteed doubles though, and there are other avenues to help him out in this area. If you want to take him down a route to patch up his speed, your best bet would be for him to land in the Swordmaster or Assassin classes for a while at least, with their increase of 20% to his speed growth, bringing him up to a somewhat respectable 40%. To get there, he'll need to focus mainly on using swords, and also bows if you want to go Assassin. Making him into a brawler will patch up his speed a little bit with a 10% bump, but it won't increase from there if you end up making him a War Master later. If you're dead set on fixing his speed, have him become a thief initially for that first 10% increase, and from there either go Swordmaster or Assassin. You could also grab him the Speed plus 2 skill from mastering the Myrmidon class, and that could help him out as well. In terms of his canon promotion, Dedue has a special appearance as a Fortress Knight, both pre-time skip and post-time skip, indicating that this one is most likely what the developers had in mind for him, and like I said before, it's definitely in line with his base stats and growth rates too. Without delving into spoilers, each student gets a new appearance after the time skip in-game, and they also get new outfits too, that aren't their original school attire. Because each unit is getting an actual outfit for the first time, we can use this as an indicator of what the developers had in mind for these characters, as their new outfit showcases just one of their potential class options, but the developers specifically chose each one for them. These outfits are also then the same in the monastery as they are on the battlefield, which is not usually the case. In Dedue's case, he's got a brand new outfit for the Fortress Knight class after the time skip. As a Fortress Knight, he'll definitely sport even more impressive growths to his main stats, HP, strength, and defense, but unfortunately his already bad speed takes even more of a hit. Assume that your Dedue's speed will never increase going down this path. But that's not the end of the world. With his massive HP stat, even if he's doubled, he'll still take a beating before he goes down. Keep in mind that if your Dedue is really slow and you're finding that he's unable to secure kills, you can always slap a pair of gauntlets on him too, for that guaranteed double attack effect, like brave weapons. But overall, this class just doesn't provide Dedue with very much, and with his already tanky setup and personal ability, he doesn't even really need Fortress Knight to solidify him. The class also has a pitiful 4 movement to deal with, which means he'll have some issues getting around. He sacrifices a lot just for a little bit more bulk. Some of his other options will make him more effective and round him out better than he'll be as a Fortress Knight. Great Knight might at first sound like a cool option for Dedue with his tankiness and patching up his movement by being mounted, but overall it only stands to make his rough spots worse. His speed growth drops even lower to a pitiful 10%, the class base speed is only 10 so don't expect much of a jump up there, his res also even takes a hit, making him even more glass against magic, and the stuff that he gets from the class just doesn't even justify being in it for him. On top of this, it's going to be even harder for Dedue to be raising his riding, considering his lack of proficiency there. Lance and Axe Fair will increase his attack with those weapons when attacking, but why have 2 different melee weapon types when you can just use axes and bows? And sure, Canto is cool, but there are much better fits for Dedue, and I don't think that this one is the way to go for him. Warrior and Grappler are good fits for Dedue, but there's overall not much of a reason for him to stay in these classes when he can become a War Master afterward anyway. War Master does what both of these classes do better than either of them, with higher stats and mobility on top of everything else. Consider these 2 classes optional stepping stones on the way to War Master. I suppose it's more of a question of if you want to go through Warrior for the Rat skill, or go through Grappler for Fierce Iron Fist, an attack that strikes 3 times, and Tomebreaker for extra hit and avoid against mages. War Master is definitely the easiest of the master classes for Dedue to unlock, and one of the best for him in general, since it takes axes and brawling, both of which Dedue is good at and typically uses. War Master patches up his speed growth slightly with a 10% growth, but it won't really matter at this point as the class also gives him Quick Riposte, allowing Dedue a guaranteed follow-up attack when he gets attacked at over 50% HP. So this helps to mitigate any speed issues, and the gauntlet proficiency of this class means that you should have some guaranteed doubles on your phase too, so speed is less of a concern with this one. Fist Fair and Axe Fair both give him attack plus 5 when attacking with their respective weapons, and crit plus 20 from the class will also give him a flat 20% crit boost on top of higher stats and mobility. Coupled with the nice 6 movement for an infantry class, overall this is a really good fit for Dedue. Once again, we have to talk about the Wyvern Rider and Lord option like I mentioned earlier. Wyvern Lords have some of the highest speed bases in the game. The way that class bases work is that when classing a character into that class, if your character has, say, low speed like Dedue, it will instantly be bumped up to the base speed of the new class as sort of an adjustment. If you leave the class and return to your old one, your speed and other stats will become what they were before. So if Dedue has less than 20 speed, which would be likely, he'll jump up to the base 20 speed of the class, plus get an extra 4 speed from the innate bonus of the class, instantly minimizing a lot of his speed issues. So if you're concerned about his speed, this could also be a way for you to fix it. But with his lack of ability in flying, it's going to take a bit more work to have him go down this path. Like a lot of other physical units though, it'll be an amazing class for him. Ultimately though, no matter which route you pick, Dedue should do what he does best, smash skulls and hold choke points, patiently spending his turns waiting for the extra +4 defense from his personal skill. Watching enemies run to their demise into this mountain of a man is always deeply satisfying to watch. Or he could make a pretty spicy dancer, just saying. Felix is another really standout unit among the Blue Lions. If you've played the early game, you'll have no doubt noticed that he holds his own right out of the gate with his measly iron sword. This is also in part due to both his personal skill and crest effect. Felix's Lone Wolf personal skill grants him an additional 5 damage when he doesn't have a battalion equipped, or when it's got 0 endurance. This means that unless you need someone to bring another gambit to a battle, Felix should probably fly solo, without one for the majority of your playthrough. His major crest of Fraldarius also sometimes raises his might when using a weapon, so whenever this procs in battle, he'll be dealing even more extra damage. Coupled with his impressive 55 strength growth, you can clearly see that Felix is going to be hitting like a truck. Felix is built like a classic Myrmidon character in the series, albeit with slightly better strength and other growths than most. Typically they're speedy and rather frail, but with nice dexterity, previously known as skill, for a higher chance of landing critical hits. I do want to mention that alongside dexterity, luck also helps to determine crit chance, including crit avoid to avoid enemy crits, and it also helps with magical hit too. But Felix also has something else going for him, a decent enough magic growth of 30%. Coupled with his flat damage dealing personal skill, plus the fact that he'll be getting some extra magic growth from the magical classes that he switches into, he'll easily be able to adapt and become a pretty powerful magical-based character as well. Felix's canon class appears to be Swordmaster, judging by his post-time skip outfit, which makes perfect sense. But honestly, it really seems like with his budding talent in reason and his decent magic growth alongside his impressive focus on swords, Felix was born for the Mortal Savant class. Heck, his dad is a magic user too, if that convinces you further. As a Mortal Savant, he'll take a painful speed penalty of -10%, but with his already solid 55% growth, it's not that big of a difference, and by the time that you get him into this class, he should probably be pretty fast already. Aside from that, he also gets a nice 10% increase to his magic growth and other helpful growths across the board. Like I mentioned earlier, in terms of the spells Felix will get as a magic user, he's somewhat limited in this department, learning a measly 2 spells, Thunder and Thoron. All things considered though, zapping enemies with the occasional Thoron at 3 range and slashing them with incredible speed and strength with a sword up close still seems like a pretty cool and useful combo. Felix could also pull off the Warlock class, this being the ultimate class for male mages, who focus on black magic, and he'd enjoy the Black Tomefair class ability, which gives him +5 attack when using black magic, as well as doubled black magic uses, allowing him to use Thunder and Thoron twice as much per map. The class also gives him Bowbreaker at Mastery, granting 20 extra hit and avoid when using magic against bow users. All of this sounds pretty cool, but the class is locked to 4 movement, which isn't the best, especially when you consider that he can run around at 6 movement and have more fun as a Mortal Savant and still use black magic. And considering Felix only has 2 spells to actually work with, going all in on magic with this one just doesn't seem the most optimal to me. He'll be a one-trick pony. Then there's also Dark Bishop. Felix would have access to Fiendish Blow for magic +6 upon initiating, which also can't be stacked if you already got it from mastering Mage before it, Heartseeker for -20 avoid to adjacent foes, and Life Taker for HP recovery after defeating foes. But because he doesn't already know Miasma, he won't get the extra uses for it like Hubert does in this class, and generally speaking most people consider Warlock the better option, since most other male characters have black magic and not any dark magic like Hubert. So Felix's black magic spells won't be getting any double uses here, he'll barely get a single dark magic attack, and Bowbreaker from Warlock is also probably more useful than Life Taker, considering archers are the only units with more range than mages, and more of a threat to the mage's generally low defense. This class is supposed to be a mix of utility and offense, providing cool effects, debuffs, and so on, but even Felix doesn't quite have what it takes to live up to the class's full potential, because most characters, especially males, just don't get any dark magic. Also keep in mind that the only way to even utilize this class would be to steal the Dark Seal from a particular enemy who shows up a few times during the story, or kill that enemy, which will be challenging, and you'll need at least 2 of them to unlock both Dark Mage and Dark Bishop, so it'll take some planning to set up in advance. So it's a mixed bag here, even for Felix. If you're going to do this with someone in the Blue Lions though, I feel that Felix and Sylvain are the two best bets and have the most potential with this class. But honestly, I'd probably lean more towards Sylvain for it. Sylvain's got a longer spell list and thus more attacks to be stuck in this class with, and even their offensive growths would be pretty similar, with Sylvain having 40% magic growth and 50% speed to Felix's 40% and 55%, and Sylvain would even be slightly tankier with his better defensive growths of 35% and 30% compared to Felix's 25 and 25. It's up to you, but unfortunately Dark Bishop just doesn't really work out that great for anyone who isn't Hubert. Felix also works as both a Paladin and Dark Knight too, if you want to go with a mounted endgame class for him for the extra movement. Both of these classes really help to round out Felix's growth rates even better, and Dark Knight also provides the extra attack with Black Tome Fair that could help him out, but his spell uses wouldn't be doubled like in Warlock and would still be rather limited. For Faith Magic, Felix gets access to Recover and Restore, but no Physic, which is kind of unfortunate, so I wouldn't really rely on him as a healer. There are better options for it. And then there's the bow route for Felix. In general, I think Intelligence Systems likes to give archer characters lower strength growths so that they're not absolutely destroying things too easily from long range, and this is why Ashe, Bernadetta, and Ignatz all have the same 35% strength growth. But if you look closely here, Felix has both a proficiency in bows and also a 55% strength growth naturally, meaning that if you wanted to, he could make a disgusting sniper or bow knight as well. And this could also work if you wanted to make Ashe into something else to fix up some of his growths and still have an archer in your ranks. And of course, here we are again, Wyvern Lord. Considering Felix is good at pretty much any physical class because of his ridiculous growths, personal ability, and crest, of course he's insane as a Wyvern Lord too. 75% HP growth, 70% strength growth, 65% speed. Yeah, he'll be getting some ridiculous level ups in this class on top of the stellar stats, avoid, and mobility. If you have Felix go Paladin first and master it for the Aegis skill, he'll be even more disgusting, reducing bow and magic damage by half, with the trigger percentage being his solid dexterity stat. Of course, if you're also worried about enemy archers on their phase, you could always dismount too, or if you have an A+ in flying, you can unlock Alert Stance, granting even more avoid for spending the turn waiting. So you can basically fly into enemy territory and tank with this class too. It's just nuts. Training both riding and flying would be a bit of a chore, but the other meme in the community, Bow Knight, would be something to switch to near the very end of the game, after Wyvern Lord, so he can get all the strength from leveling as a Wyvern Lord, and then turn around and have bow fair and bow range +2. Yeah, dirty strats. Too long didn't watch? Felix is amazing at just about anything you could do with him, especially more so in the physical realm. Ashe starts out a little underwhelming compared to some of the other units in the Blue Lions, and though his personal skill Lockpick allows you to never have to worry about keys in this route of the game, they're always given out on maps with chests and doors, or accessible via Byleth in the convoy anyway, so ultimately it leaves a little something to be desired from him when he could have just gotten something to assist him in combat. He's got some really great growths in dexterity and speed, but aside from that his other growths are somewhat mediocre, like his 35% strength growth. Early on, no matter where you plan on taking him long term, I'd recommend dropping him into the fighter class in the beginning to at least bring that 35% strength up to 40% with only a minor downside in -5% resistance. If you go through Brigand too, you can also get him Death Blow, which will give him the extra 6 strength when initiating combat, which will further help him out throughout the game. His 25% magic growth might also be low enough for you to disregard taking him into magical classes too, and his unique spells are bad. He doesn't really get anything cool, so that one's a no from me. Ashe's canon class seems to be Sniper. Some people believe it should be Assassin based upon his past, but perhaps being taken in by Lord Lenato has reformed him and turned him around a bit. Assassin is a fine class for him, and it further increases the areas he's already good at, alongside some extra help in the HP department, but it doesn't really patch up any of his rough areas either. It's just fine. But I suppose if you like lethality, the exclusive Assassinate attack, stealth to be harder for enemies to target, or the lore of his thief origins, then this could be the pick for you. Sniper ends up giving Ashe a nice little 5% bump in strength, which gets him up to 40%, a little bit better, and overall evens out his growths just a bit more too. But like I mentioned earlier, 5 move isn't the best, and I think most would probably prefer to just take him into Bow Knight. With Ashe's proficiency in axes and ability to go down the War Master class line if you want, I think in general it'll be at least a great secondary weapon type for him. Warrior also works really well with Ashe, providing him Axe Fair for an extra +5 attack when attacking, as well as crit +10 when using an axe too. It'll also give him Wrath, giving him +50 crit when he's under 50% HP. Couple all of this with his great dexterity, proficiency in axes, and growths that patch up his strength, and it all sounds like a great way to go as well. But this class doesn't do much to make up for Ashe's poor defense growth, leaving him somewhat frail, and likely to be easily worn down by enemies if you're not careful. It also has 1 less movement at 5 than other options like War Master. War Master patches up Ashe's strength nicely too, leaving him with a solid 50% growth, as well as bumping up his speed to 60%, which is great. It also gives him crit plus 20 for even more shenanigans, and upon mastery he'll get War Master's Strike, which is an attack that can be effective against all enemies. But for all of this, you'll have to start off working on both axes and brawling for Ashe, so you probably wouldn't really have enough time for him to really work on bows, and then he would potentially not be able to use his Deadeye and Waning Shot combat arts. Once again, like Warrior, War Master also doesn't help him much in the defense department, so he might also be a bit squishy still. Bare minimum, I think a great weapon type for him, even if it's secondary, will always be axes. Or you could go with lances if you want to get his budding talent combat art, Seal Strength, for a -5 debuff on the enemy after combat, but I don't think it's necessary. Of course, once again, a good option for Ashe would also be going the Wyvern Rider route to Wyvern Lord. He starts off with axe proficiency, so he'll take to it quickly. The classes in this line will patch up his strength growth, and he'll have massive mobility and still be able to swoop by and unlock chests or doors if you need to, for that extra utility. The extra avoid with this class and getting A+ in flying for alert stance plus for even more avoid also helps with his frailty too. Ashe could also focus on axes and swords and go into the hero class for a combination of Vantage and Defiant Strength upon mastery, and then jump into Swordmaster with his ridiculous dexterity and become a crit god who can survive brutal assaults on enemy phase at low health, gaining extra strength and attacking first before the enemy can act. And of course, how could I not mention Bow Knight? This will also be a great class for Ashe. The growths really won't do much for him, as they don't really for anybody, so like I said for others, it might be best for him to just end up in this class after working on his strength elsewhere. But with bow range +2 and the class's extra movement, Ashe will have incredible mobility and range and be able to snipe at distances, coupled with things like Deathblow from the Brigand class, and you'll have a pretty interesting little monster who can get around quickly and pick at things from afar, dealing significant damage. Unfortunately, that's going to be all the time that we've got here for today, but if you want to see the conclusion to this guide and the second half of it, be sure to stay tuned on the channel. It'll be coming out very, very soon. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed it up to this point. Be sure to let me know if you have any alternate build ideas or anything that worked out in your playthrough in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Thank you to all of our amazing patrons. Be sure to follow us on our social media accounts, including our Discord, and I will see you all in part 2.